I think, I could be wrong, but I think, so I'm going to say it, this may be the first time that anybody has released specific IRs specific to certain records that were recorded. Usually IRs are released in a general fashion. This is this cabinet and this microphone. In this case, not only is it this cabinet, which in this case, most of the times is a Mesa Boogie 4x12 recto cab, and not only is it these microphones, which varies depending on the records, but this was the actual setup that I used to record those records. And I thought there was something really special about that,
Hey everyone, this is David from KillerGuitarRigs, and today we're talking to the one and only John Petrucci, who's going to walk us through his new guitar company, Tonemission, dedicated to high-tech products for guitar players of all kinds. John, it's really awesome to have you here, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David.
Awesome. Now, you started Tonemission, and recently you shared a teaser on your social media, and people kind of freaked out and, what's happening right now. And so can you take us to the beginning of this idea, how this came to be, when did this idea start?
Yeah, well, the actual idea of Tonemission and the name came a while back, many, many years ago, because I'm just like most people probably listening to us or watching us, just obsessed by tone and guitar sound, and the whole journey or mission that I've been on is just very like, everybody has their own story and their own version of that, but it's very common amongst guitar players, especially in our community, where we get so passionate about what we like, so opinionated about what kind of guitar sound that we like, and what kind of amps and gear and guitars and things we like to use. So the idea of a Tonemission and that word kind of came to mind many years ago, and I sort of always imagined it in sort of a twofold way. One was more in a generalized kind of community way where, I'd like to sort of establish a place where people could sort of share their own Tonemission stories the way that I have done my whole career, and just kind of have a place for people to do that. And I know obviously these places exist all over the internet, of course, but I just thought I would I wanted to sort of foster that with Tonemission someday. And the second part is that it was I wanted to create a brand that I could branch out with my own products, and that carried that Tonemission brand and logo that would kind of equate to just being really high quality products in this, domain. They could be electronic products, they could be guitar products, hardware, software, whatever. But it was kind of more of an open term that I used for a company that I wanted to build. So this was a while back, and it's taken many, many years, and I sort of finally found the first thing that I thought would be worthy of actually launching the company and everything that goes along with that, like the website and the socials and everything else. So that's what this is all about. But the idea came a while back.
Awesome. Now, you now introduce you're introducing John Petrucci IR collection, the impulse responses, and it includes 3 packs. There's Terminal, Liquid, Green World, for all of your bands and projects. Can you walk us through what these are like and what gear they're based on?
Yeah. Well, the thing that's interesting about this whole thing is I was never really into digital products, admittedly. I've always been an amp guy and cabinet guy. I've always used them in the studio and on tour. And of course, there's been incredible technology that has come forth with a lot of the hardware, with the Axe effects and Neural's Quad Cortex and things like that. But it was only until I actually did the Archetype Petrucci with Neural where I really dove into something to present a digital version of my gear and my sound in such a way that I thought was so incredibly convincing and done so well. And those guys just have it nailed better than anybody, right? So that kind of launched me into this whole world. But meanwhile, in the background, while I've been in the studio over the last couple of years, me and my engineer, Jimmy T, had been capturing IRs just from my albums, not really with any intent to release them or anything, just to have them, basically, in case we wanted to use them in any sort of application ourselves, reamp something, or we wanted to capture those moments. So, as you said, we actually did that for Terminal Velocity, my latest solo album, Liquid Tension Experiment 3, and Dream Theater's A View from the Top of the World. I think, I could be wrong, but I think, so I'm going to say it, this may be the first time that anybody has released specific IRs specific to certain records that were recorded. Usually IRs are released in a general fashion. This is this cabinet and this microphone. In this case, it's not only is it this cabinet, which in this case, most of the times is a Mesa Boogie 4x12 Recto cab. And not only is it these microphones, which varies depending on the records, they're all sort of different combinations, but this was the actual setup that I used to record those records. And I thought there was something really special about that, if I can go back in time somehow, and sure, you might be able to get a certain cabinet and microphone that AC/DC used on Back in Black, right? Like, there's tons of IRs of that combination. But if you can say, hey, this is the actual IR from that studio session, here it is. That would be crazy, So I just thought there was a lot of value in that, and that's what I'm super excited about.
That's really great to hear, yeah. And we live at a time where there's an abundance of great guitar plugins, software, some of you that you mentioned. And but as far as home recording goes, people usually use the actual thing. From my experience, some of the home enthusiasts who are recording at home may not use impulse responses all the time. But how important do you think is to have these quality impulse responses, and how much can they change your tone for an average guy recording at home?
Right. Here's the best way for me to describe it. I think that the technology in the digital world has really advanced to the point where the ability to model an amplifier and what it does as far as its components and its gain staging and everything, it's getting really, really good with even just apps on the phone. There's all companies that do this stuff. I mean, they sound great, right? But the thing that really makes the difference is the IR, and it makes a difference to the player. In other words, as you're playing, one of the things that guitar players feed off of is the way an amp feels. You'll always hear that word, feel. It does, how it feels. It's and it's usually they're referring to the way that the amplifier is reacting in real time in its environment. Which is very random. When a guitar head is plugged into a speaker cabinet and it's in a room, how you can play the same chord 10 different times, and the way that it moves through the air is going to be different every time. So it's that feel thing, whether or not it feels like you're pushing air out of a speaker, it feels like you can feel the sort of give of the strings and the woodiness of the cabinet and all that stuff that we love, all that nerdy, geeky stuff. When that's not there, it's really sometimes it's hard to play on a digital sound like that. It doesn't sound personal. It sounds like all sort of compressy and one-dimensional. And what the IR does is it gives it life and personality, and lets you control the dynamics much like you would if you were actually playing out of a guitar cabinet. So to me, the IRs, what I found is you could really hear a major difference if you just load in different IRs into the same amp model that you might be using. And you will hear an incredible difference. And again, it does come down to taste, people might like hearing their guitar out of a 2x12. People might like a 4x12 by this company or that company, or they might really prefer this type of microphone over another, or think it's horrible to use that microphone. Why would you ever use that? And so all that comes down to taste as well. So in the case of my IR pack, we are presenting you my taste, our taste. This is the decision we settled on when we were in the studio. This was the ultimate sound to us. But also in addition to that, we did also include the individual microphones. So the IRs, you can load them in as a blend. In other words, this is what we recorded the guitar through. These microphones blended in this way, EQ'd this way. Or you just want to use one of the microphones, you want to use, the 301, you can have that one too, and you can hear what that sounds like. So it's a really complete pack in that way too, and you get an idea of how different the microphones are. The other thing about this too is where they're placed. That's another taste thing as well. Where the microphone's placed on the speaker cabinet, how close to the speaker, how close to the center of the cone or away. And these are all decisions we made, so they're done for you. You just load it in and boom, you have this great sounding IR. So really important for the home recording enthusiast for sure.
Awesome. And now you mentioned that, the official release, the official press release says that you have the IR collection, but if you can talk about it, that's okay. If you can, that's all right. But do you have anything else planned in the future, or should we wait a bit longer for this to be revealed?
We do have a lot of really exciting ideas for the future. This is our debut product, so all has sort of led up to this, and there's a lot of work to get to this point, of course. But once this has been established and the infrastructure is all done, then the ability to move on to other ideas and projects is going to be a lot smoother for us. So we haven't really, we haven't announced any of those future products yet, but we have a long list of things we're really excited about. And we're going to see where this takes us. The cool thing about the Tonemission, that as a word or a slogan or a brand, is that it really is open to so many different things, and that's what I like about it. In this case, it happens to be IRs, but in another case, it might be something totally different. It might be a physical product, it might be something that involves another artist, possibly. I think the possibilities are really open with this company.
That's really good to hear. All right. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you kind of answered that, but I'm going to be kind of get into that as well. You're well known for your Mesa Boogie JP2C amp, which is one of the holy grails, let's say, of guitar amps today. And you weren't into really digital amps and digital stuff that much in the past, and you said you changed your mind. Exactly. You mentioned what changed your mind, but was there one moment when you realized, when you played something, when you heard a specific tone, or did it just change over a few weeks, months, years? How did that exactly go? Did you have that one moment where everything changed for you?
Well, yeah, I did. Getting into sort of the modeling hardware side of it, I think that's been going along great for a long time, thanks to Fractal and what they're doing with the Axe effects. It's an amazing unit. There's a lot of incredible sounds. It's been for many, many years, and it's been only getting better. But anytime I tried a guitar plug-in, if I just had the DAW open, let me try this, I don't want to mention names, or this one, or this amps, never did it for me. It always sounded like, I don't know, just like a toy amp or something, But one day I got I was hearing a lot about neural stuff, and they sent me the Pliny archetype. And I remember we set it up, we had my laptop and speakers just like anybody else would. It started playing, I was like, oh my God, this sounds like, that was the first time I had that, wow, this actually sounds amazing. This sounds like a usable amplifier, creative tool somehow coming out of my computer, and that's the first time I had that experience. So I knew that if I were going to do this at all and get involved in this space, it would be with that company, because I think just Neural DSP is just doing it really right on all levels. And sure enough, when we decided to work together and we worked on my archetype, I mean, they just went all out to come out with like the greatest guitar production suite that in the plugin world I've ever experienced, and I know a lot of people enjoy it. So I know we did a great job. They did a great job. But yeah, that was the moment, probably playing through that Plenty one, where I was like, oh my God, this sounds really cool. Because usually it's the opposite. I'll hear all this hype and I'll try something. I'm like, I don't think so.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's still, like, as years go by, this ever-present discussion between, like, digital and analog, and,
Yeah.
And you mentioned that, like, moving air and, like, exact microphone positions and what you did with the impulse responses and everything. But do you think there's, apart from that, perhaps, do you think there's anything where digital modelers and profilers, whatever you call them, still cannot pull off to fully replicate, the actual thing, the actual amplifier?
Yeah. Here's the problem with it. I think that it has gotten so incredibly good that nobody could probably even really tell, right? But it is the type of thing where an IR, just for example, it's capturing a moment in time. But the guitar amplifiers and cabinets in a real physical space, it's a random. It's like I said, it's a random occurrence of what's happening. So unless there was some sort of AI involved that like randomly created that, I feel like it's always going to be. You're going to be able to get it as close as you possibly can. But that real what's it called? Just that randomness of something actually happening. I don't know. Maybe one day they'll be able to get that. I mean, I'm sure, but until then, it's like you can get a digital representation of a person as close as you can possibly get. Like, oh my God, that's so real, it's so real. But the actual person standing in front of you is always going to be way more convincing, right? So it's kind of like that. But having said that, it's also, some of this stuff I find when I talk to guitar players, it's a taste thing, because there are guys that like just prefer, physical amplifiers and speakers always. And there's other guys that like, no, I actually like the digital stuff more because it allows me to do this, or, it fits better in my application to what I'm doing, whether that be live or in the studio. So some of it does come down to taste, because the great thing about all of it is that it all really starting to sound really good. So it's not like when this stuff first started and it was like, I don't think so, It's like now, yeah, this does sound really good. So it's a matter of like, are you going to like, which way you're going to go with it,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and one of the things that I really wanted to ask you about is, you finally used an 8-string guitar on a Dream Theater song on your latest album. And you recently talked about this seamless transition, how you didn't want to play an 8-string until you got your prototype from Ernie Ball. But as far as getting your tone, you're talking about an instrument that's like, well, pretty much a bass in a way, because you're so low down there. And but as far as you're getting desired tone, was it a challenge to get things going with your amps and gear while dealing with these lower frequencies, which are like basically like bass guitar? You're in that territory. Was that a challenge?
It actually wasn't a challenge. It what happened was I had recorded some stuff with the 8-string just through like my normal amp settings that I was using on the rest of the record, and it sounded great. But one day I came in and my engineer had said, hey, I got out another head and I just tweaked it a little bit, and I think he had reamped it like to see what I thought. And he did make some small adjustments, like maybe, you know, anything you'd have to do, like just carve out a little bit of low end, or, you know, add some more gain, or take some middle out. Whatever he did, just slightly adjusted it, and I was like, well, that sounds awesome. So it wasn't at all a challenge for me, because I didn't really have to do it. I walked in, and he had made those adjustments, and it sounded killer. So that's what's great about, you know, having great people surrounding you doing great work. So that part was easy. So
Yeah, awesome. So, and before the album came out, there was a lot of talk how there's been an 8-string guitar on there, and knowing how a lot of modern progressive metal musicians are using 8-string guitars, extended range guitar. Did you feel any pressure to start using this, or was it just a thing where it was something that you liked and you wanted to try it?
I didn't feel any pressure. I was interested in what it would be like, in the same way that I was interested at the time in playing a 7-string, because I just thought, you know, it sounds really cool when you extend the range of a guitar, or even if you, you know, tune your guitar differently. Or I played baritone guitars in the past, where, you know, the low notes, an A or a B flat. There's something that's cool about that sound. But if you notice, even in the times I've used 7-string, baritone, you know, drop C, you know, all these different things, and even with the 8-string, I don't really change my style to go with what you would expect out of that guitar. In other words, I didn't get an 8-string and be like, okay, now all of a sudden I have to write music that sounds like all of this other music. I just got an 8-string, and I wanted to write the way I write, you know. So that was what I did. I didn't get one to chase a style or want to be part of a scene or anything, because that's not authentic. That's not the way I am. That's not the way I work. And so I just wanted to, you know, I think of it this way. If you look at a piano, there's so many lower notes you can go to. So it's kind of fun to be able to have that range on a guitar. Why not? But yeah, but not to chase anything, or try to mimic anything or imitate anything that I wasn't feeling was going to come out of me genuinely. Because yeah, you'd see right through that if all of a sudden I started writing 8-string stuff that sounded like all these different bands. You know, it'd be like, okay, this doesn't sound like Dream Theater, or this doesn't sound like John.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, after all these years, your playing seems to be getting better and better, and I really need to ask you, how much do you practice at this point in your career?
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. You know, it'd be horrible if my playing was getting worse and worse. so it's good. It's good to take it in a positive direction. You know, I'm always practicing. I mean, we're on tour right now with on the Dream Sonic tour with Devin Townsend and Animals as leaders, and you know, we play a 2-hour show, and I'm still practicing during the day a few hours. You know, and sometimes you got to watch it. Sometimes I over practice, and then you go walk on stage, and then you're, you know, tired for the stage. But yeah, I mean, I love playing guitar, so that always draws me to the instrument. But I am always physically drawn to wanting to be able to do this stuff that I write and that Dream Theater writes. And in order to be able to do that, you have to be conditioned all the time. You can't just get lazy and not practice and then expect, oh yeah, I'm going to play a concert of my solo material. It's no, you're not. you gotta, that stuff needs to be worked on daily. You know, it's a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, when we're at the topic, there's this still ever-present, discussion between shredders and those who play with feel and whatever. A lot of people would tend to say that faster technical playing in prog music lacks the emotion and whatever. But do you think there's sort of a middle ground where both this virtuosic shredding and feel can work hand in hand and do something together? Absolutely
do. You know, that there's so many players that do that. There's so much music that exemplifies that. You know, if it was just exercise type drilled, practicing, turned into a song. Yeah, you might say that's pretty drab and it doesn't really go anywhere emotionally, but most guitar players that can shred don't do that. Most of the good ones who could write have the ability to take the music anywhere they want to. And part of that, it's kind of like being a classical musician. If you listen to classical music and the symphonies and things that were made, all those musicians, they had to be able to have the skills to take the music wherever the composer wanted it to be. And sometimes that was to really sensitive places that took a lot of control and a lot of dynamic playing. And sometimes it was really technical places where you had to be on top of your game and be able to play these crazy lines. So that's the way I look at it. It's being able to do all of that. It just kind of it increases your ability to be expressive, I think, as a musician, because you could take it to all these different places. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Yeah, I think that's a really silly argument. I really do. I kind of never understood that, like that there's one or the other. Or if somebody has a technical ability, that means that they're not an emotional player. I think that's pretty BS, I really do.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, while we're at this topic, I don't know if you heard Nuno Bettencourt's solo in Rise, Extreme's new song.
Yeah, of course.
Everybody was blown away, but how did you react to hearing that solo, and how did you process it?
Well, Nuno is an awesome guitar player. Let's just say that. I remember when Extreme came out. It was like very kind of like around the same time that Dream Theater did with our first record. It might have been like, or maybe with our second record, which was in the same sort of era, like early 90s, I guess. And I remember hearing like Extreme and hearing, I almost said Yngwie, Nuno's playing and just being like, this guy's unbelievable. he's like, he's a nut. He's like an amazing guitar player. And I remember learning some of that stuff and just being so impressed. So I'm not surprised at all that Nuno came up with a solo like that. The guy is just a monster player. And what a great one for the ages, man. Hats off to him for that killer solo. And I love that everybody's talking about that and talking about him and talking about guitar and talking about shredding. That's a much better conversation to have than, guitar solo shouldn't, be in rock music, I love that we're having a conversation about it, how awesome Nuno's solo is. I think it's killer. Yeah, I love it.
Okay. Another question that I had, and while we're at the topic of exercising and whatever, but the actual kind of exercise, you've been into weightlifting for a long time.
Yeah.
But, plenty of guitar players who I know have complained about how they cannot do one or the other. I actually, one of my friends, I remember mentioning you and like, how can he do that? How can he deadlift? And whenever I try, after a few days, I have like sore fingers and everything, and they lose the mobility in their fingers. How did you, did it ever affect your technical playing ability? And did you have to find a way to adapt to that?
Well, it's funny for people to say that. That sounds like an excuse to me because I'm on a tour right now with Animals as leaders, and all those guys are jacked and they're weightlifting before the show starts. Javier and Tosin and Matt, the drummer, are all doing like deadlifts, and those guys are, playing their asses off the most technical music. So I think that people that experience what you're saying, either that maybe they injured themselves or they didn't do it correctly or they didn't have guidance or something like that. I would say the only thing as a guitar player who lifts as well, what I've learned is just how to do it in a way that it's safe for my hands. And sometimes you do things that are a little scary, or you make a little mistake in the gym and then you're like, okay, I'm never going to do that again. So I think if you're if you approach it in a way where you're disciplined about it, where you're working out with correct form, where you're not just trying to lift the heaviest weight that you can to, like you got to keep all this stuff in mind and work out responsibly as a musician, because the last thing you want to do is injure your hands or injure your wrists or have a problem. And as people who lift weights and go to the gym, we've all had those. We've all tweaked shoulders and backs and things, and you do have to be careful. But the idea to say, oh, I can't work out because it's going to affect my playing. I know plenty of jacked guitar players. It's like I have Zach Wilde coming to my camp in a couple of weeks, and he's another guy. He's like just in amazing shape, and he's shredding like never before. So.
Absolutely. Now, one historical question that I kind of wanted to ask, if we go back to the late 80s and the early 90s, and Dream Theater, emerged just around the time when grunge was also blowing up. And this was also the era, like, when the 1980s metal bands, all the faster guitar playing was kind of impacted by this movement. Did you guys at Dream Theater ever, like, feel threatened or in any way like worried that you'll need to adapt, or that your band is like not going to make it because of this sudden change in rock music?
Well, I mean, we really didn't know what to expect from our career. You know what I mean? We were just young guys. We put out one record before Images and Words, which was the one that you're talking about, that was in '92 when Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains and all that stuff was huge on the radio. We were just kind of in our own bubble. Like, we weren't thinking about how we could change our sound to adapt to the new stuff. We were just like in our own little world writing these songs, and we hadn't really had any commercial success yet, so we were just doing what we did. To be honest, like, having commercial success at that time was just a crazy thing to have happened. Like you said, given that radio climate, our stuff just, maybe that was part of the reason of like why it had some success, because it really was so different, from all that other music, in at that time when the most popular rock music was coming from Pearl Jam or Alice in Chains or Nirvana. Still a lot of great guitar music coming out of those bands. Obviously, great players, but the more technical side of music wasn't a part of that style. So our music being so, I don't know, different and exhibiting more technical aspects and playing aspects, maybe that made it stand out more. I wonder if it would have been worse if all the bands at that time were all prog metal. Maybe we would have got lost. Who knows? Whatever the timing was, it worked out.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one more question from me, and I'll let you go. So, what's in store for Dream Theater right now, and are there any plans for new music in foreseeable future?
Yeah, well, right now we're on the Dream Sonic tour, which is our own traveling prog metal festival. Like I said, with Animals as Leaders in Devon Townsend, we have about 9 or 10 more shows left across Canada and the U.S. And that'll be it for Dream Theater as far as touring for 2023. We'll take some time off and we'll get into the studio soon. So I'm imagining, if not by the end of the year, by the beginning of the next year, we'll start working on new music.
Awesome. John, it's been a huge honor having to talk to you, and I, hope that we'll soon see more new stuff from Tonemission and, of course, Dream Theater.
Yeah, I'm excited. Cool. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. And you're my first you're my first interview having to do with Tonemission, so thank you.
Oh, really? Okay, okay. We'll